Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a fitness professional turned novelist. Her books are set in the not-too-distant past and examine how women reinvent themselves despite obstacles thrown their way. A central theme is that blood is not all that makes a family, and her stories always feature a piece of jewelry. She's a Women's Fiction Writers Association member and co-founder of the South Florida chapter of the Women's National Book Association. In addition, she's a founding member of the Author Talk Network, an administrator of the Facebook group Bookish Road Trip, and editor of their newsletter, Wanderlust. She lives with her husband in New Jersey, but when the leaves fall and she has to swap sandals for shoes and socks, they move to their home in Florida. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Linda Rosen.
Thank you so much, Julia. This is wonderful being here. I love hearing that. It's fun. It's fun, and it's an honor to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. And Linda, as always, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, it took me a very long time because it was even way over 50 when I wrote my first book. But actually, I'm an avid reader. I was always an avid reader. And I was in book clubs for a long time. And I thought how fantastic it would be to write a book of my own and go to book clubs. But I never really thought I would do it. It was just, oh, how great that would be. And then when I was nearing my 60th birthday, I was looking for something new, creative to do. As you said, I'm a fitness professional. So I was always creating exercise routines to music because I have to have music and dance. And I did the same kind of creative stuff that people were doing, needlework, crewel, that sort of stuff. I garden. I was dabbling in photography, and I was looking for a photography course. And I came across a writer's workshop. And I thought, well, that would be fun. That would be different. And I dug in, and boy, my fingers haven't stopped since I started that workshop. So it took me quite a while because I didn't really ever think that I was going to be a writer. And when I started writing, I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea how difficult it was, or it is, to write a novel. We think, oh, we wrote compositions in school, I can write. So it was a whole long learning curve also from the time I started until I published my first book. Yeah.
I was an English major in college, and I thought, well, how difficult can it be? But writing fiction is a different animal, and it is difficult, and it takes a long time to get it right.
Yeah, it does. And I think we're all still learning every time, can always make it better. But when I first started that first workshop, they were using the term the craft. I had no idea what they meant by the craft, and that's very important to know. So, yeah.
Well, once you wrote that first manuscript, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
When I wrote my first manuscript for, can I show my book?
Yes.
The Disharmony of Silence was my first. Um, I really didn't know about anything other than the big five. And I was looking for an agent way too soon. I didn't realize my book was not ready. So that was several years of going back and forth and making it better and all of that until I got involved with the Women's Fiction Writers Association and I learned about small presses. So I had queried agents. Some I got responses asking for fulls or partials. Nobody offered. Some I never heard back from. And then once I heard about the small press and I saw how many people in the WFWA were with small presses, I thought I would take a look at that. And it's really quite a story because I found a small press that I was interested in, and they had a website submission form, and I submitted, and I never heard anything. And at that time, I was working with an editor that I had hired. Um, I had found her from the Inks and Insights, which was a group that I had submitted to. I submitted a certain amount of pages, and they were editors, and they were coming back with their critiques on the work. And this one particular editor nailed it, but I didn't like what she said. So for a few days, I wasn't happy with her until I realized she was the one who really understood. And I hired her. So making a long story short now, I'm going round and round. When I told her that I had submitted to Black Rose Writing and I never heard back from them, she told me that they were her publisher. She had 4 or 5 books with them at the time, and she told me that I got lost in the website change and had me submit again. So I did. I submitted. The next day, they got back to me asking for the full manuscript, and a month later, I was offered a contract. So it was in the stars. It really was.
That's a great story. I followed the same path, thinking I had to be with one of the big five. I think it was six at the time, whatever they've
I
consolidated
don't know,
to
maybe they're
now. But
four now.
I thought we had to have that agent, and I sent out so many queries like you far too early before I had been edited or anything like that. So I think that's just a mistake that we make on our debuts, and we learn from that.
Yeah.
And there's so many options today with the small presses and self-publishing that authors have. I've read the statistic that it's like 2 million books, 2 million titles a year are published in the US alone. And that's just incredible to think about trying to find our way through all of that to have our books noticed.
Yeah, it's publishing world. It's a difficult business to be in, and I'm really happy with the small press. I have heard from people who are unknowns also, but have gotten a contract with one of the big houses, one of the imprints, and they don't get the attention that I'm getting from my small press. So, it's
And only
never
about
know which way it's going to
10%,
go.
10% of the proceeds, so
Yeah,
it's not all it's cracked up to be, I'm
yeah,
afraid.
yeah, yeah. Unless you're going to be that one phenomenal book author that they're going to push that year, that you're going to be the big one. But I'm very happy with my small press. I really am. And they're growing and growing. So I'm thrilled. I've published all my books. I have 3 books published with them. I plan on publishing my next with them.
Well, how did writing that first book change your process of writing, or did it? changed the process, or what made a difference between that first book and the second book?
When I was writing my first book, I knew I wanted to get it published because I wanted that validation, but I guess I wasn't as serious about it. It took me a number of years writing that book until I was really seriously writing. I would write now and then. It was, a number of years. I worked with a developmental editor, but it took a while until I really sat down. And I would say once I got serious about it, it was 3 years from the time I wrote till I was published. The second book, because I had, you have that period of time when your book is accepted and it's going through their processes of getting published to write. But I had been writing my second book, which was Sisters of the Vine. I had been writing that all along while I was writing the first one. That's what I mean about not really being serious for quite a while. And then I pushed that one away, finished this Harmony of Silence, so that when my publisher did ask me if I had another book in me, I said, I do, but it's not done. This was like April of 2020. And he said, well, send it to me in May. And I said, no, I'm not done. It took me 10 years to write the first one. Give me a chance. But I did. I got it done by the following fall. But I was a serious writer at that time. I knew I had to sit in my chair, whether the words were coming or not, and write that book. And so now the third one, The Emerald Necklace, took about a little over 2 years of writing. So yeah, I got more serious and I learned my craft.
I think that's the most important thing that I learned from the first book is the process. I knew which editor to call, which cover designer, and the process was speedier for me. I could write much more quickly. It seemed like, rather than, like you say, not be serious about the process.
Yeah. And I find even now, I am serious about my writing. I love when I'm at the computer and the words are coming out of me. But there are days that I don't write. And I'm not one of those writers who writes all day long. I might write an hour one day or 3 hours another day. And another time I might want to go to a museum with a friend or out to lunch or be at the beach. So I'm not writing every single day, but that story is with me every single day.
And I think taking time away from it and having those other experiences enriches it because you get to look around and see a character you might involve in the book, or an experience might end up in the book that you are experiencing yourself. So I think all of that really just helps us, not just sitting and trying to bang out the words like I did during NaNoWriMo. I don't
No,
know
I
if you,
never tried that.
oh, I, I never thought I could write 50,000 words in the month of November, but I did. But it was just throwing those words on paper so you'd have a real ugly mess to edit at the end.
And that's why I've never tried it because I can't, I mean, I can't write an ugly mess. It takes me a long time. I could spend 2 hours on a paragraph sometimes because I can't, some people can just spill out those words and then go back to it. I need to make them sing before I move on. So, and you're right. I do like to be out about enjoying life. And yeah, some of those experiences that I have, a conversation that I overhear, actually have made it into my books. So be careful when you talk to me. You never know.
Well, what do you find is your inspiration for each of the books? Did an experience happen? Did you research something or find a little history that you wanted to write about? How does your inspiration for a book come to you?
Okay, let me tell you about each one because each was very different. My first book, The Disharmony of Silence, I was sitting on the beach with my sister-in-law and a girlfriend. And my sister-in-law was talking about a painting that was in her mother's home that had hung there her whole life. And now that she was selling her mom's home, she didn't know what to do with the painting. And she didn't want to throw it out, but she didn't want to have it. Nobody in the family wanted it. So she decided to Google the artist and find her. And she found her living in San Francisco and decided to return the painting to her. I just looked at my girlfriend and I went, what an idea for a story. And it just took off from there. That one took off from there. My second book, Sisters of the Vine, as I said, I was writing it at the same time, a couple months here, a couple months on the other one. I connected with an old high school friend. It was around 40 years after high school. And I heard her story of how she was the first woman winery owner with a woman winemaker in her area in Pennsylvania. Her story was fascinating. And I decided I was going to write her story. But after getting involved in that, trying to stay with the truth, I was hamstrung. So I put it in a different period of time. I put it in the 60s, which was the period of my period of time. And I brought in the history also, the second movement of feminism, and as well as the Vietnam War, and wrote that book, which takes place on a hillside vineyard in the Hudson River Valley. So then I was really hooked on writing about the 60s, but I didn't want to stay with Vietnam War. I didn't want to do civil rights. I was looking for something else. And I came across the Strike for Equality, which was on August 26, 1970, when women were really fighting for equality in the workplace, as well as reproductive rights and all women's rights. And that sent me to do a tremendous amount of wonderful research, because I connected with women who were actually at the march. One of them, who's one of the women who organized it in New York City. There were marches all over the country, but this was the one in New York City. It was huge and wonderful research, having connected with the real people. So, but the book is not only about women's rights. It's really about envy between a sculptor, a very insecure sculptor, and her neighbor, who's a best-selling mystery writer. And I have a girlfriend who is an award-winning sculptor. So I had a lot of fun researching sculpting. People think I know how to sculpt, and people think I know how to make wine because of my first book. It's just all in the research.
Well, and that's so true that we can take an idea and couch it in so many different eras or, different places, move it around, and it creates a whole new story. I have threads of memoir running through my first book because I'm an adopted child from a maternity home. And that's the story, is that three women meet at that maternity home to relinquish their babies for adoption. But my birth mother, I had searched and found her, and she was still alive. And so it really wasn't just my story to tell. So I wrapped it in fiction, and it made it a lot easier for me to be able to do that, as well as move the time, because I wanted to get to when the first commercial DNA kits came out, and those were much later. So I pushed it forward from the 50s into the 60s. So I love how authors can do that and move characters around to different places and different times.
Yeah, and that, to me, that enriches a story when you can set it historically, and yet with yours, to bring in your own personal history, it just brings such uh, beauty to the page. Um, I'm going to have to interview you because I'm working on my next book, so I'm going to have to talk to you about that subject. But even with that, like I mentioned, my book is about envy. with the writer and the sculptor. All of us, we don't want to admit it, but every writer, and I probably every creative person, there's envy. I'm not going to say jealousy because jealousy is a real negative term, but you can't help being envious of somebody else who won the award and, oh, why didn't I win that award? Well, maybe I didn't even apply for the award, you know. But so I was kind of exploring that also in there. And because my books take place, well, two of them take place in the 60s and 70s, I was learning a little bit more about myself too with this whole second phase of feminism, because that was the period of time that I was growing up. So we bring ourselves into our stories. I think even somebody who might be writing in the 15th century brings herself into her story somehow.
I agree, and I do think that it's difficult not to be envious of those who are the New York Times bestsellers or the Reese Witherspoon picks, things like
Right.
that. But, we all have a story to tell, and when people find that story and reach out to you and say that it affected them, that's my favorite part of writing. When I
Abs-
wrote that adoption story, I heard from birth mothers and adoptive parents and other adoptees from the whole community, and they tell me how the story touched them. And that's a legacy that we want to leave.
Yeah, I would say that's why I write. My whole idea of when I started writing or when I dreamt of being a writer without really thinking I was going to was always to have somebody curled up reading a book that I wrote that it touched them in some way. And and then to hear from readers, that's the best. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read from it so we can hear your tone and voice?
Okay. Well, I'm going to read you the very beginning of The Emerald Necklace. And really, this is the very beginning. And why I chose this was it's it's introducing you to this character, Rosalie, who is the one who becomes envious of somebody else, but you don't know that at this point. But why and what she's going through. So it kind of sets up who she is. And I hope that it grabs you to know more. So it's the very beginning of chapter 1. Her artistry was gone. It had come to a screeching halt 3 months ago, the day Arnold died. She hadn't touched a plant or, worse, a piece of clay since. She had walked the beach each morning, swam when the tide was low, scanned magazines, unable to concentrate on a novel, and had the occasional afternoon tea with a friend. That was all. Now, on this January morning, with the Florida sun on her shoulders and her knees on the grass, her trowel burrowing deep into this dry, sandy soil, she tried to get it all back. She shoved the trowel deeper, wiggling it around, nudging it under the roots. The metal hit a rock. It wouldn't budge. With a tight grip on the wooden handle, she shifted the tool left, maneuvering it under pebbles and sand. The pointed tip got caught in the roots, making her dig further down under the fine hairs. A little deeper, and she got purchase. Finally, she scooped up the tropical plant, dropped it and the trowel on the ground, and sat back to gaze at the clear, blue early morning sky, watching a jaybird in flight, a blue jay in flight. Though the hard, dusty soil was nothing like the moist, malleable clay she so loved, she wanted to keep the garden as lovely as Arnold had. Holding the bromeliad in her hands, she carefully pulled the new shoots off. It was as if the plant was giving birth. She laid the baby plants on the ground and dug holes in the soil, making new homes where they could grow, where they could mature and expand. Despite the hole in her heart, the ache she was sure she would never that would never go away. Rosalie knew she had been one lucky lady. She'd had 15 years with Arnold, short but marvelous. Now he was gone, and at 63, she wondered how she would live without him, without his arms enfolding her each morning, she purring like a kitten, the sheets tangled, the scent of sleep on his skin, without his hand caressing her thigh each evening as they cuddled on the couch watching television, without his encouragement when she was frustrated with the clay, without him. But this morning, there was a lightness in her chest, one she hadn't felt in a long time, merely from getting out of the house and accomplishing something. No more of this doing nothing, she said aloud, reiterating the decision she'd made earlier when the delicious aroma of Maxwell House perfumed the kitchen. It's time to get back to life. Actually, she needed to create a new one. And what better time than the start of a new year? Was she ready for that? Yes, she announced to the sky. After transplanting these babies, I'm heading to my studio. Merely making that statement brought her spine up straight and a gentle smile to her face. Her studio, the one Arnold had built for her when she moved into his turquoise Florida cottage with a gold band adorning her fourth finger. You need a place of your own to sculpt, he'd said, where your creativity will soar. She had put off her sculpting for far too long. Now she was ready to work again, or hoped she was, to create a piece Arnold would have been proud of. No, she told herself, one she would be proud enough to dig up the courage she desperately needed, the courage to put her work out in the world for others to see, to judge. The hum of the tires on the road made her turn. She watched the UPS truck pull up to the curb and a big burly man get out. Oh, that's heavy, she called as the driver extricated her package from the back of the truck. Let me get you a cart. No need, ma'am. Where do you want it? Rosalie pointed to the driveway. She would wheel it to the studio herself as soon as she finished transplanting, and that couldn't come too soon. Okay, then, the man said. Have a lovely day. I imagine you'll be watching the inauguration later. Sure, yes. She waved him goodbye, thinking, no way. This girl would rather be pressing her fingers into the new clay than watching Richard Nixon sworn in as the 37th President of the United States. With her knees back on the grass, Rosalie placed the baby plants in the dirt and tucked them into the ground like a mother tucked her babies into bed. Splashes of bright green and hot pink leaves dotted the garden. She stood and bent forward, stretching out her spine. One more thing, then it's on to my studio, she told herself, and walked over to the hose attached to the side of the house. She turned the water on and dragged it to the front to give her babies their much-needed nourishment, just as she would nourish herself with the clay, or so she hoped.
That's great, Linda.
Thank you.
You have us right in her world and gave us such a glimpse of her personality and everything about her.
That's what I was hoping. And then the next sentence is when this woman comes up who annoys her and keeps her from her clay.
Yeah. Well, you had some statements in there, I think that all artists and creatives can relate to.
Yeah, the questioning of yourself.
Yeah.
Will I will I
Yeah.
do it?
Yeah. And the old imposter syndrome that we all have, is it good enough? Everybody else's is better than mine.
Yeah. And that goes throughout the book until she comes to terms with herself. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because in this book, Fran, who is the best-selling novelist, she's got her own issues and own envy with Rosalie. And that's where the jewelry comes in, because these two women have such a bitter envy of each other, and it could tear them apart. But Jill, Rosalie's granddaughter, has this emerald necklace, and the secret behind the emerald necklace could bring them together, could bring Rosalie and Fran together. And that's actually the cover of the book, if you can see it, has the three hands in a sculpture with the necklace
Oh, yes.
because
Beautiful.
it bind these women together.
Nice. I love that you're placing a piece of jewelry in each book. I love that continuation of a theme.
Yeah, well, the first book, um, it was the painting that I mentioned before that sets my character searching for the artist. But it's more than just the painting. There's a cameo brooch hanging on the painting that is exactly like the one in her mother's jewelry box. And after she researched online, she sees that the one her mother had was very rare. And so she goes searching for it. And so I had that jewelry in there. And in Sisters of the Vine, not even planning on having jewelry in all of my books, I do have a 3-carat marquee diamond. And it's an
Nice.
heirloom just at, yeah, well, that one I don't own. I do own the cameo. But it's an heirloom, and so is the cameo an heirloom. And so when I found out that I was a brand, or I had to brand myself, which to me, you know, brand was Wonder Bread, Pepperidge Farm, Um, the wonderful Lisa Montanero, who worked with me on branding me, would said the jewelry is my brand, which really is, it's a pleasure, it's a joy, it's fun, but it also helped me with writing my third book. I had to have jewelry in there. Okay, I can find this piece of jewelry, which comes with a fun story on its own, but what's the secret behind the jewelry? And even though I knew I was setting it in the 60s and 70s and I wanted to have women's equality in there, well, why? How is this jewelry going to come in? So that set up the whole secret behind the jewelry. Yeah.
I love that. And I love that we ask ourselves so many questions, and that just leads us more and more into the story and makes the story, come alive.
Yes, I don't know if people, if readers, because I never realized it as a reader, how long an author will marinate over a subject and come up with ideas. Even if a whole idea comes to you, okay, I'm going to write about blah, blah, blah. You still ponder. And as you're writing that first draft, you're really telling yourself the story. At least I feel that I am as I'm writing it. And more comes to me. Sometimes I think of things when I'm swimming, a lot of times. I don't know, water has something to do that with that for me. Or even in the shower when I can't write and I can't write when I'm swimming, but great ideas come to me then. And it sends me back to the computer. And sometimes they find their way into the book. And sometimes, well, I thought it was great, but it's not, you know.
I think exercise really does kick off something in our brain. And I'm
Yeah.
riding my bike and I think of things, and I need to get something an app I can speak into my phone about, because I have to rush home and write down the idea or it'll vanish like a dream.
Right. But if you're riding your bike, you got your phone with you. You can talk into it.
That's true. I need to
I've,
learn how to record everything and
oh,
learn
do
how to
it.
use
Yes.
all the features of our technology today.
Just please stop writing. I mean, stop riding the bike.
Yes,
Don't, don't do it as you're riding. I've
right.
done that driving sometimes, something comes to me and I have to pull over and talk into my phone.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We writers do love to write, but we don't always like to promote ourselves. Have you found um, challenges in publicity, trying to find things that have worked for you or didn't work? What have you been doing to promote these
Okay.
books?
I was very, very fortunate that I got involved through the Women Fiction Writers Association with a group called the 2020 Debuts when my first book was coming out. And I met, and you have to remember, this was during COVID. My book came out right before COVID. We met online. We met on Facebook, then we met on Zoom. but my world opened up. And the writing world, other authors are so giving, whether they are well published, 8 novels, 10 novels, or their very first. My world opened up. So I've really enjoyed the networking, which has led to marketing. Just as you said to me off screen before, we've seen each other or, all over the place. It's just wonderful how I've blossomed at this third, how do you put it? Your third act or
With life's sweetest third.
life's sweetest third. And I call it the third act or whatever. We're never done. Um, I didn't know how to market. I depended a lot on my publisher who taught me a great deal. And I learned a great deal from all the other writers that I have been in touch with and have made real friends with. Um, when you do it through networking and through pure joy of helping each other and shining a light on each other, it's it's not bad. It's not a negative. It's a real positive. And so it's okay. I enjoy it. I really enjoy it.
Well, you mentioned off screen that you've been fortunate enough to get a U.S. BookBub deal. That's just huge. And all of us are sending in our requests constantly, but I haven't gotten a U.S. one, only an international one. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and this goes to show you how I knew nothing with the first book. My publisher sends in, he submits to BookBub all the time. Every week he's submitting titles. I got an email from him shortly, I think it was shortly after my book came out. I can't remember if it was before or after, but it was right around the time of the publication. And through the email, I could see he was jumping and dancing for joy. And he said he would share in the cost with me. And I looked at the price and I went, oh my gosh, am I going to pay that? And my husband and I were both thinking, do we do this? And he assured me, he said, you have to do this. I rarely get this deal. And I did it. And it was a fluke, I think. I don't know. But we sold close to 4,000 ebooks in one day. They were priced at $3.99. I thought this was phenomenal. Well, that never happened again. The second book and the third book did get international. I sold nicely, really nicely, but nothing like that phenomenal US book, US BookBub deal. But I have found BookBub is fabulous, really. The more you're on BookBub, and I review whatever books I read on BookBub, Goodreads, and Amazon, and I truly hope I really hope they will review because I didn't understand it before I was a published author, how important those reviews are. And they don't have to be a book report. They can be, oh, I love this book, great book, simple, 1 line, 2 lines. But I do review, and the more followers you have on BookBub as an author, the more BookBub will do for you when you have a book coming out. So I've got now 930 followers on BookBub,
That's
and I'm
great.
shooting for that 1,000 because that's what I hear, that if you have 1,000 followers, they truly promote your book a lot when you come out with a new book. So I'm hoping to have 1,000 by the time my next book comes out.
Well, that's great. And that is phenomenal success on BookBub that you had. So 4,000 books is a lot of books.
It was amazing. And of course, because it was my first book, I thought this was going to happen again and again and again. But it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And that's okay. You have to realize where we are and have my expectations are very real. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you're writing another book at this time. You seem to write two at a time. So what's
Oh, no, no, no. That was just the first time. I realized you cannot do that. Or maybe, I don't know, somebody can, not me. No, and that wasn't a smart thing to do. That's why it took so long. But no, I am writing another book. Right now it's called Untitled Book 4. And it does have a piece of jewelry. This is with earrings, and does deal with women's rights also, but this is in the 20s. And it's going to be a dual timeline also, 20s and the 50s. But it's a mother-daughter. It's a mother-daughter story. Yeah.
I love dual timelines. I use those myself, and I seem to pick up those books and read them most often.
Yeah, I really enjoy them. Also, my first one, I tackled that in my first book, and that was a whole learning curve because when I first started writing my debut, it was it was present day, and it was 2 points of view until I realized I needed that whole flashback in there, and I didn't want it as a flashback, so that pushed me into a dual timeline, and the second point of view kind of went away and it gave it to somebody else at a different time. But I enjoy writing in dual timeline. I love reading them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, this has been a great visit with you today. And as always, our last interview question on authors over 50 is our writers over 50 are quite a unique group. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Yes. Just do it. Enjoy it. Enjoy the entire journey. Enjoy the days that the words don't come and the days that they pour out. Enjoy the networking, meeting each other, and keep your head on straight. Not everybody becomes a New York Times bestseller, but enjoy every moment of it.
That's wise advice. I think we should enjoy every moment of our journeys, and we just appreciate your being here with us today. I love your stories, and I know you're so proud of your many accomplishments. And now we can count you among our authors over 50.
Yeah, well over 50. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really been a pleasure being with you. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.